Welcome to Wildflower, from Wildflower, Rooted and Reckless, the podcast where writer and storyteller Angela Walker creates space to bloom in the wildest places, sharing stories of grit, grace, and growth.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Wildflower from the Wildflower Rooted and Reckless podcast. I am Angela Walker. We left off last episode with the struggle of leaving my newborn essentially behind in the hospital and the requirement for me to be brave through that. It really got me thinking about the people in my corner during that time. I remember when I walked out of the ultrasound doctor's office and he had just told me the good news and the bad news. And I had to share that news. And I remember I called my dad because he was the strongest person I knew. He was the person I wasn't going to have to be strong for. And he wasn't going to ask me for anything or want anything from me. I could not get off that elevator fast enough to get my phone to call him. And this is before cell phones were so prevalent. I said, Dad, we've got a problem. What's going on, Munchkin? And I said, well, the baby doesn't have spina bifida, but the baby has gastroschisis. And he had no idea what that meant, because who the hell knows what that means? And then I told him, and he said, all right. Okay. So what do you need to do? I said, well, I got to schedule this appointment and come to these follow-ups. And he said, okay. All right. And I told him I hadn't told Mom yet. I think he actually ended up telling her. I was so angry and so confused and so hurt. I could not figure out. I followed all of the rules. Okay. I followed all of the rules. And I thought, why? How does this, why? Like, I followed all the rules. I did all the things I was supposed to do. How does something like this happen? And I had no answers. Of course, I asked everybody that would listen, the doctor first and foremost. And I remember saying to him, how does this happen? How does something like this happen? And admitting to him, I had one drink before I even knew I was pregnant. And I don't even think I finished it. And he said, you know, gastroschisis is just one of those things that we don't know. We don't know what causes it, where it comes from. I remember him saying that they had not found anything that had tied any of these cases together. At that time, I think it was like 1 out of 2,000 infants, typically firstborn, typically male, were born with gastroschisis, which is really honestly a pretty large number for it to be so not known about. But I was horrified. I just didn't understand, like, why? Why me? Why my baby? What had I done to deserve this? And there just was no answer for that. None. I stayed pretty distracted. I was pretty good at staying distracted. Dad and I had split up. I had moved back in with my parents. I remember I was walking around the local Publix and bawling my eyes out because I just couldn't figure out how I had gotten there. All of a sudden, I'm this 18-year-old single pregnant girl living at her parents' house, and the baby has a birth defect, which hopefully will be okay. He needs surgery. I think I had no idea how serious it was either. Like, I couldn't be outrageously upset because I didn't know what I didn't know. And that was for the best. And I remember Linda, our longtime friend, seen me in the store and came up and hugged me and what's going on. And I told her what was going on. And she said, you know, Matt and I bought a place and her son and his girlfriend were like in one side of it. And then there's like a shared porch and then like an efficiency. And so we worked it out that I would live in the efficiency and I would move my job. I would leave my job. I was working in a different town, so I would leave that job at the ice cream place, who I did eventually tell I was pregnant, by the way, and that I would start working at Publix if they would have me. And they did. They hired me, and I worked at Publix, and I lived in this efficiency, and I went to dinner at Matt and Linda's house a lot. I would go out to their family's property and just a lot of things to keep my mind off of what was going on. So I was working, I was hanging out with people. Her son is a good friend of mine as well. His girlfriend and I had known each other for years and years. She actually worked the night shift and I had insomnia at one time. And so she would get off work and we would go take a beach cruise, or we love to cruise what we call Casey Key with all like the big houses and stuff, and maybe get some Taco Bell and whatever, just hang out and relax and talk girl stuff. And she even cleaned my bathtub. She actually came and cleaned my bathtub because, we were afraid like what I could and couldn't use being pregnant. So that part of I was so blessed. Talk about silver linings. I was so blessed to have amazing people in my life, amazing parents. My little brother at the time was like 6. So Matt and Linda and their family were amazing. Everybody just welcomed me with open arms. It was just like nothing was happening. So yeah, gosh, just kind of going through all that in my mind. And then I remember when I started getting the low amniotic fluid, they would actually take me to the hospital and drop me off at the hospital so I didn't have to have a car there, because I never knew how long I was going to be in the hospital for. I could be in the hospital for just a couple nights, or I could be in the hospital for a couple weeks. It just depended on my amniotic fluid levels. And so because they were so low, like when they went to do the amniocentesis to check the lungs and development before they scheduled the C-section, I will never forget. It was like that movie where the guy's like moving the needle around, but he's trying to actually poke the baby, which was really freaky to think about whenever this was going on. But they had to like move the needle around to find the pockets of fluid to actually get enough amniotic fluid to do the amniocentesis, which was so painful. But I don't think anything that they did physically was as painful as what I was going through internally. And in a weird way, that kind of saved me. That conflict saved me because I couldn't focus too much on one or the other, for that matter. Again, was just super blessed. I had this nurse. She would often be working the night shift when I was there. And I remember she would always sneak me a snack at night, like grapes and a turkey sandwich. I could have like 2 little bars of chocolate, like Hershey's chocolate, and just a little tiny glass of soda, just a little couple sips, She would sit and watch with me. We would watch like Steve-O and Bam Margera and MTV, and because I was still just an 18-year-old kid, That was pretty like intense and raunchy for that time. That was kind of like the oh my gosh of that time. And I remember she wasn't older, but she was probably 40. And she would sit with me and laugh with me and talk with me and obviously do her job. But I wish I remembered her name. I know that's terrible. I wish I remembered her name because she was a huge saving grace for me. And it's so funny how in these moments of despair and uncertainty, these people are placed in your life, in my life, that are these little lights in such dark times. They matter so much. I remember the first time I got to hold Cody. Obviously, it was at the children's hospital and he had come off the vent. He didn't need oxygen anymore. I would wear like a button-up shirt so we could do what they called kangaroo care, which is it's just skin to skin contact to help with that bond. And so I remember sitting down, my shirt's unbuttoned, they are unhooking tubes and moving things, and they laid him on me, and I started bawling my eyes out. I just started crying so hard. I don't know who thought I was going to drop him more, me or them. And it was just everything I could do. I just wanted to hold him and protect him. It was like everything just gushed out at once. All of the sleepless nights, all of the nightmares and not being able to find the baby, all of the hours of pumping, all of the smiling through the pain and telling everybody I was fine and everything was okay. It all just came flowing out in that moment. And it was like this surreal moment of everything's going to be okay. I finally had him in my arms, and it's uphill from here, right? Like it's all uphill from here. And I had no idea what was in store for us next. Cody had an amazing recovery, one of the fastest they had ever seen. We had an incredible team of nurses and doctors. One of the nurses right away came to me. I remember her name was Melody, and she said, "Angela, this journey is going to be intense." And she was so honest with me, and I loved that. I love that. And she said, "We're going to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So you're always moving forward, always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're always moving forward. But those 2 steps forward may be minuscule, tiny, tiny steps of progress. And that step back may feel like an avalanche, but you're always moving forward. You're always a step ahead." And at the time, I smiled and nodded. I was super good at that. Smile and nod, smile and nod. Yes, I understand. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. Everything's fine. I'm fine. This is fine. Nobody be upset. Nobody worry about me. We have bigger things to be concerned about. This is fine. I was an expert at that. As Cody continued to heal, we started to introduce the breast milk, and he started taking little bits at a time. We started gearing up for me to come stay at the Ronald McDonald House so I could be there more often. And we were about 2 weeks in. Everything was fantastic. Everything was going great. His feedings were going well. He wasn't vomiting. He was off his oxygen. The tubes were coming away one by one. He had like the little NG tube, but otherwise he was a survivor, a thriver. Like he was just knocking this thing out of the park, something you write home about. And I got a phone call one day saying that we needed to come to the hospital, that the doctors would be waiting for us and they needed to talk to us. And that's all that they would say. So I immediately called Dad, called my parents. We got to get up to the hospital. Dad came home from work, picked me up, and we went up to the children's hospital. We walked in and we went to his spot where he had been and he wasn't there. I asked the nurse, where is Cody? Where did Cody go? So she brought me to him, and it was so weird. The nurses kept looking over. I could just tell like something was looming. There was something heavy. It was looming. I'm looking at Cody. I can't figure out what's going on. I'm looking at my partner and he is just like, chill out. I'm sure it's fine. Like, just relax. And she kept giving me this, like, I am so sorry look. I'm so sorry. She walked over and she started talking about testing. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, have you spoke to the doctor yet? And I said, no, I haven't gotten to speak to the doctor yet. She turned white as a ghost, like absolutely white as a ghost. She was like, hold on 1 second. Let me get the doctor. So they brought us into a room and they sat us down and they explained that Cody had been moved up to the 3rd floor overnight. That is kind of your finish line, if you will. You go to the third floor. There's some training about bringing baby home. You got to do a little class, bring your car seat in to make sure you know how to use it and that you have it. And you bring baby home. So we were just days away from bringing Cody home. We were so close. He spiked a fever. And they tried to treat it. They couldn't get his fever down. And so they had to bring him back down to the NICU. They started him on some general antibiotics. They did not know what was causing this. They couldn't get ahead of it. They didn't know what was causing it. They were finally able to get the fever managed. But they had taken blood. They had run a bunch of tests. They still were in the dark. They ended up having to call infectious disease from Washington. They flew in and they were able to eventually determine that Cody had contracted a bacterial infection in his PICC line. That bacterial infection typically would be found as like the stomach flu, but it set up shop on his PICC line and it went into his bloodstream. It circulated his blood flow, went into his spinal fluid, and it caused spinal meningitis. It cut off blood flow, it cut off oxygen to the brain, and essentially damaged about 3/4 of his brain. They had to do more testing and some imagery to find out the extent. They weren't sure, obviously, at first. They didn't even have the infection under control at that point. But they knew that he was going to have to be on some heavy antibiotics for a while. And so we were essentially starting all over again. We had already talked about me kind of moving up there and staying at the Ronald McDonald House where I could be close by, especially as he was inching closer to coming home. But obviously this scenario just made things move a little bit faster. And so I packed up my things and my mom drove me up to the Ronald McDonald's house and helped me get settled in. So yeah, we were preparing to bring home baby. And as it turned out, the journey was just beginning. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of Wildflower, Rooted and Reckless. Tune back in next week as we pick up on the battle that has begun.
You've been listening to a Wildflower, Rooted and Reckless podcast production with Angela Walker. Catch Wildflower drops on Tuesdays, Rooted on Wednesdays, and Reckless on Thursdays. Subscribe wherever you listen. Stay wild, stay rooted, stay reckless.